Okay, it has started.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to our IDC meeting today. It is Thursday. It's April the 22nd, and it's 2:07. So we'll have, do we need to go around and say everyone who's on for the recording, Joanna? Maybe, yeah.
The recording sees you all, so not necessarily.
Oh, very good. Okay. And we'll keep it going. There is the anchor location declaration, which basically says that we are still in the pandemic. And so there are the special meeting circumstances, which have all been followed. And of course, everything is still public, and I'm grateful for all the transparency. Oh, there we go. Tom Ross. Chief Ross, you'll always be chief to me. Good to see you. You're muted. You're muted. Get unmuted and then greet us.
All right, is that better?
That is better.
Thank you. And you can call me chief. I think a lot of people still do it, whatever's comfortable. Sorry to be just a little bit late. Glad to join the conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, so I think we're ready for the approval of minutes. And I did look over those. And so anyone else who's had a chance, if you read it, it looked accurate. I'll take a motion. If you saw anything we need to tweak or fix, let us know.
Madam Chair, I move approval of the minutes.
Great.
I'll second.
Okay, so that was, who was the second? Was it Mike? Michael? Other Michael? No.
I was willing to. This is Ryan.
Oh, Ryan, was that you?
No one else said something.
Very good. I'm following up just to make sure that we know, because sometimes on Zoom it's hard to catch. Very good. Thank you, Ryan. I have a motion and a second to approve these minutes. If there is anyone who does not approve, then please say nay. Okay, sounds like they're unanimously approved. So let's see, number 3, the managing defender job. We're going to have the staff intro to this agenda item. And we've all received a copy of a draft for the managing defenders in Utah, the Indigent Defense Systems. It is a draft dated April 2021, and I read it and I thought it was great. But staff, go ahead and walk us through this, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll start. So we've been at this for nearly 5 years, and we have taken different approaches each year to the overall improvement of public defense in the state. Hi, Margaret. And in the past, we have funded managing defenders. We've created the position in Uinta County. That's being said, Uinta County helped us create the position. Same with Iron County, same with Sevier and Wayne counties and Carbon County. We never gave these people a job description. We never told them what we really expected of them or what we hoped they would do in that role and why they were so important to organizing the system and getting better reporting to us, better communication about the benefits of what we're providing them, all those things that we know we've provided over the past, but that we haven't necessarily known how they're helping. The trick and issue that was very resoundingly or very pointedly brought to my attention by Rich, and it's truly not new to me, but are managing defenders just the people who are over these contract systems? And I think the answer is yes, but then how does our funding, especially this year where we've prioritized funding for managing defenders, affect Pam's office, Margaret's office, Rich's office, the organized public defender offices that have executive directors and chief public defenders in them that function a little bit differently. So I think that is something that we need to resolve with this. And then also the list of duties. Did we get them all? Did we go too far? Did we miss people? And so a lot of you have given really good feedback on this, and I would like to continue that. And then I'd also like some thoughts about whether you think we should adopt this as a formal IDC document, kind of like our core principles, or if we need to necessarily leave it more loose to as we help people evolve into it. I think the benefits of making it more formal is that we can then say these are the expectations for you managing defenders that we are funding, but there are managing defenders at all stages over the state. So that's my introduction to this long document. I haven't gotten to everyone's comments to change things and address them, but I just want to hear a discussion on this document, and I will not share it because you all have it in your documents so we can actually see each other. But maybe a 5 or 10 minute chat about its benefits, uses, misgivings, shortcomings, anything? Go, Rich, come on.
No, I'll start. No, I think it's a good document. I mean, I think the thing that we do have to think about is how are we going, if we're going to use this document, and I think it's a good document, and I think it's a good roadmap, how are we going to enforce it? In other words, what are we going to do and who's going to do it? So the what are we going to do? So if we create these expectations for defenders, managing defenders, it strikes me as though someone, IDC, the Indigent Defense Services Office, somebody has to have one or more discussions per year to talk about goals that the managing defenders are going to try to achieve, and maybe a plan in place about how to achieve the objectives that are placed in the document itself, and then how that will be either dealt with, communicated to the commission, or maybe not communicated to the commission. Maybe it's internal. But I do think maybe the first step in the process is, if we have this document, what are we going to do with it, and what will our expectations be with the defenders? I recognize that it's a priority for the IDC to have a managing defender system. And as you know, Joanne, I sent an email earlier today saying, well, where does that put the systems that already have a managing defender in place? And you identified the 3 main offices: Utah County, Salt Lake County, and then Pam's office. And does that put us on a lesser priority scale? I mean, I think that's a little bit of a different question than obviously adopting these principles and then providing some degree of fidelity to make sure that there's some oversight that they're being implemented properly. That's a little bit of a different discussion, because it's a priority of, does that mean an office that has a managing defender, what happens to them in terms of priorities and resources? And then I had another question of, one of the things, and I know Michael knows this because we've talked about it for 10 years. What happens when some system goes to a full-time defender? What if a system, let's say UNA, Duchesne, decides, well, wait a second, we've got enough bandwidth now to go to a full-time defender office. Is there a lesser priority of funding? And then how long do we make this particular principle, the principle of developing managing defenders, how long do we make that a funding priority? Which I guess is sort of the last question, because there's a whole lot of other human resource kinds of things that we could do. I mean, obviously, we know from this session, bail reform is a huge issue, and we play a significant role in that. And the best way that we can really address bail reform, in my opinion, from an indigent defense perspective, is to have boots on the ground at an early stage of the proceedings. And where does that fit in the priority of all of this? So I guess I have more questions than I do answers, but I think those are the important topics of discussion from my perspective anyway.
That's helpful. Thank you.
So Joanna, can I just jump in too? This is Heather. I've read the document. It's good, great outline, great description of priorities. And I understand our funding priorities this year, but I think making it anything more than an aspirational document at this point would really leave cities kind of out in no man's land. There aren't a lot of those smaller systems that have this arrangement. And I guess that gets me back to how long this is going to be our funding priority. And is there a path forward for municipalities under this structure?
Michael, I think you wanted to say something, but can I just say one thing to answer sort of that path question? If you look at our core principles, and this was the reason why we focused this year on managing defenders, number one is that organizational capacity, right? The foundational structure of a system. And the next one is then counsel it all to all eligible individuals. So that would then point to CAFA. And I think if I'm remembering our global plan, it was to move through the principles once we had this one in place and had more structure in place. But I think that's up for discussion too. And we'll see that in my PowerPoint about the intent to applies and grants this year. Sorry, Michael.
No, I mean, I'm happy to listen some more. I was going to say that, I mean, I recognize cities may have different issues. I wonder whether we shouldn't be thinking about sort of waterfalling money depending on the character of the recipient and their level of need. In other words, money goes, if it's a system that seems to need a managing defender, that it gets first priority, and then maybe Rich's point about boots on the ground at first appearance, you know, does that get second priority? And so that if somebody already has a managing defender, they don't have to put money on a managing defender. They can go directly to number 2 or number 3. The challenge I can see with what we're doing this year is there's an element of it, but it's not, it's a little more rigid than that. And I can imagine this also creates a political issue, because we have to look at a system and say, this system, pick one, you know, this system really needs a managing defender before it needs anything else. I say anything else, I'm overstating as usual, but a managing defender is really important here. Here, not so important, perhaps. They're getting along with whatever sort of jury rig system they're using. And then the boots on the ground issue maybe rises to the top. But I wonder whether we shouldn't, maybe not this year, but looking down the road, think of analyzing each system and saying, you know, not just once a year, but do we have a continuing diagnosis of a system, a continuing description of it? I can imagine some local governments would not like that, because it maybe sounds too much like state setting priorities, but we really are setting priorities with our goals, with the way we distribute money. But if we made it sort of a continuing, an ongoing diagnosis, people would feel we were also there on an ongoing basis to address their needs, determined by a dialogue.
Thank you.
That's all, nothing more.
All good comments.
So, Michael, to your point, I think that's an excellent point. That's going to be a heavy lift. You know, that is a heavy lift, but I don't disagree with you. I think you're absolutely right. I think looking at system by system diagnosis, because you know, we've had, I guess it's more like 13 or 14 years now we've been having this discussion about what do you do with a system that, for example, the office that I'm in, that's been here for 50 years, that has some institutional knowledge and funding and a history, versus a system in other parts of the state. And I have to say, the IDC has done a fantastic job at sort of centralizing a lot of the principles and goals of indigent defense. And so I think from that perspective, there's been some good movement. But I think you're right. The next lift is a heavy lift, and that is, you know, a system-wide diagnosis and looking at that. And that will be hard to do, because that's going to take a lot of sort of thoughtful process of looking at what's really needed in a system, and figuring out not only what's needed, but how are we going to make sure that those goals that are articulated in that ongoing dialogue are met. And that will be our real challenge. But I agree with what you're saying.
What brought it so much to mind was reading the paper that Joanna sent around, not counting the typos. You know, it really brought home to me how rural we are in our rural counties, how small, you know, the capacity is in terms of lawyers, in terms of management. And then there's that whole, you know, that whole example about the murder case up in, is it Rich or Cash or?
Cash.
Yeah. You know, and how ethically it's certainly arguable that the lawyer might have done something was pragmatically sensible, but it certainly was not ethical, at least from my perspective. So it brought home to me how different it is in, pick the places like Salt Lake County, Utah County, Pam's office, and some of the more urban counties, and then pick these really rural places that sort of one size fits all just doesn't make any sense. And they're very, I mean, I sat in, I guess, 3 of those meetings, and one I felt there was, you know, somebody was really trying to get a grip on it. Another, not so much. A third one, it was a real educational process going on with a county officer as well as with the lawyers. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, because I think we have a long way to go. But we need to have an ongoing program instead of just year to year to year. I mean, I know we have an ongoing program, and Joanna's done a great job, and I think you're right, we have done a lot, but you know, every year shouldn't be a restart.
If I may jump in, I agree wholeheartedly with what Michael is saying. And I mean, I had the experience last week of appearing by WebEx on a, shall we say, outlying justice court law in motion arraignment calendar, where I was horrified to discover people negotiating settlements on WebEx publicly in front of everyone, which of course gave me an opportunity to hear what was being said to pro se parties and what was being offered. And there wasn't a real push to get there wasn't, as nearly as I could tell, a public defender there at the first meeting. There wasn't. Everybody was told if they wanted a lawyer, they had to put it off a couple of months till the next calendar, or a month to the next calendar. People wanted to resolve their cases, or thought it was in their best interest to resolve their cases. They were pleading to things that, in my opinion, they should not have been pleading to. They were accepting things where a much better deal could have been obtained simply by asking for it. And the rolling consequences to 10 or more people while I sat and watched was just very, very troubling. And I feel very conflicted, because we need I mean, the concept of having management is obviously a critical concept. And yet, if there's literally no presence there in that courtroom to manage, it seems to me the first obligation might be to get a soldier up on the wall to hold back the hordes that are attacking. I mean, it was really very troubling. And I think the management is very important, but also getting someone there to throw themselves in front of that freight train that was happening is important as well.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yes, go ahead, Pam.
thanks. I was just gonna say, I apologize for being late. I really like the idea of the managing defender situation. I think that it helps with so many of the things that we've struggled with in terms of like, how do you manage a caseload for independent contractors? It gives some definition to those people who have individual contracts with counties and understanding that there will be oversight and it will be in this capacity, and this is what the oversight will be expected to be. Because I think a lot of what we struggled with in the very beginning was how do you get the individual attorneys, like Mary is talking about, to be able to comply or be able to do some of what we're talking about in terms of reporting or kind of changing the way that the structure of things work. But also to Mary's point, which I think is a great one, is that, I mean, we do need the boots on the ground and things, but I do think that managing defender also becomes a real support to trial level attorneys in building. I think one of the major benefits of my office, and I don't know if Margaret and Rich would say this, and obviously it's been harder during COVID, but we've managed to do it. But there are those immediate people that you go to and you brainstorm with because you have the benefit of a structure. And I realize that we're not talking about an office, but I think knowing that you have people that you can go to and that's part of the definition of what's happening in building a managed contract system, is how do you develop that networking between defenders to really brainstorm and problem solve creatively issues for clients. I think is super helpful. And I think that the managing defender helps with that. I think Rich's point is really legitimate because we have counties that have offices, and then we have counties that have managing contract or managing defenders kind of in place, and areas where there is management going on and then areas where there isn't. So I think to Rich's point is like, do we set goals each year to say, as we're starting new managing defenders, these are the priority things on the document to focus on? I think would be really good. Because like I said, I think we have had managing defenders that have been in place in some counties for a long time. But what has that meant in those particular areas?
Thank you. I have something as well after others do. Anyone else have feedback?
Tom, we're a bunch of lawyers. You got to just start talking, Tom.
Okay, I'm being too polite. Is that what you're saying?
Chief.
No, I really appreciate the conversation and on the indigent defense side, and what this commission's doing, and Joanna and her folks is really impressive for me. And it's interesting to try to find out how that fits in with the world that I've probably spent a lot of time dealing on the other side of it with law enforcement and oftentimes dealing with prosecutors. I agree with the idea and concept that, you want to elevate the bar, right? And I think that's part of the responsibility of this commission and the effort that's being made, is making sure that we're doing it appropriately and we're meeting, have a best practices across the state. I know from being involved with the Chiefs Association for those 5 years, even good ideas at times and even good policy for some agencies, smaller agencies, sometimes rural agencies, made it very difficult. And sometimes just the fact that we were pushing something forward would cause them to drop off. So I'm a big believer that you do want to set the bar and you want to move it a direction. I think the timing of how we do that is as important as what we're trying to accomplish at the end. If, you know, I used to say to employee supervisors that we're evaluating, 10% better performance from a poor performer is as good as 10% better performance from a high performer. We're moving the bar up. And so it may be that you can't, you know, that it takes a longer timeline. I don't know what the pushback would be. You understand that probably better on this side than I do. But if you believe there's going to be pushback, there may need to be a longer time frame. Or maybe we put it out to them saying, this is the goal. Who, you know, if there's challenges, let us know what those challenges are. And then we address it county by county, or at least those areas. I think it's similar to what we're going to have to do with JRI, is try to find out what's working and what's not working in each county and try to elevate it.
Thank you.
I could say also on this, specifically speaking to the document about a managing defender job description, as Joanna described it, there's a few purposes that get accomplished by that in my mind. One is it puts everybody kind of on notice and gives them a sense of what we understand the kind of confines, limits, and role of a managing defender might be, in an aspirational sort of sense in particular, I think. But I think it also gives a managing defender something to point to and say, this is, as that individual works with the attorneys in their jurisdiction who are providing indigent defense services, gives them something to point to say, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is why I'm trying to be involved in this work. And that helps give them some backup from this group, because we've made some pretty big asks of them without necessarily reducing it to writing. And so this helps reinforce and buttress that. I think back to my own time in Uintah County when I had a contract, and I think about, I had a contract doing parental defense, juvenile defense, and I would do some criminal defense as conflict counsel in the county. And I would have hated the IDC. And I would have hated Lance Dean breathing down my neck out there saying, you need to report, you need to do this, you need to do that way, because I understood myself to be doing my job very well. I don't need you to be looking over my shoulder, you being Lance and by extension, the IDC. But now, having been involved in this work, the conversations, seeing what's possible in places around the state when there's a little more structure, I would actually be the opposite of that. And I would have welcomed having a Lance Dean and an IDC who was providing some structure. And yes, there's some burdens, but ultimately at the end of the day, the benefits outweigh those burdens. And this document of describing the managing defender's role, I think, helps outline what we expect the benefits would be and gives them something to as managing defenders, fall back on when they get confronted by people who would have been like me back in the day.
Great, thank you. My feedback is related, but who else? Anyone else have thoughts?
Well, I was just picking up on what Michael just said, is the managing defender could essentially be the person on the ground who is carrying our message to the local community in the person of someone local. And a managing defender, for example, in Mary Corcoran's situation, would be somebody who could say to the county commission or to the city, or even raise it with the prosecutor, you know, this is a real ethical problem here for you to be cutting deals, A, publicly, B, in lieu of giving people counsel. In other words, to the extent that the managing defender buys into the job, they really become an extension of our program, if not of us. But we're kind of putting somebody out there who's an advocate for what we're supposed to be doing.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Can I just follow up on what Justice Zimmerman said? I mean, I think that that is 100% spot on, because Rich, I don't know about you, but I feel like that is like probably a huge percentage of our job, right? It's dealing and communicating with Salt Lake County about what we're doing and what the needs are of the office and what the struggles are. And then also doing that same thing to communicate with the court about what you can expect from the attorneys or the prosecuting attorney and how we're going to be handling things and how we're going to be coordinating stuff that also makes when that stuff gets organized, makes everybody else's life a little bit easier, right? Once you get there. But I mean, I think that's a great point to the benefit of.
Well, yeah, and to Mike Drexel's point, it is in communication. It's, Mike, as you know, it's a very fine line between sounding like you're dictatorial, because if that's our message, and Michael Zimmerman's point too, if that's our message, we're in trouble. I mean, we really are. I mean, that person who not only has to carry our message, but they have to be both a mentor, they have to hold people accountable, they have to be there to help. It's a managing defenders a heavy lift, and I see Margaret nodding her head because she knows, right? I mean, we have to have discussions with lawyers who are very suspicious of us because they think we're the principal to begin with, and that's where our real challenge comes in, is to try to convince them that no, we're here to help ultimately, but helping also is holding people accountable for the work that they're supposed to do. I mean, if people are going to justice court, not even if they're a defender and they're doing the sorts of things that are being done that Mary talked about, that's a real problem. And I don't think that's a hard discussion to have with somebody to say, hey, you can't do that. If you have a contract with us, you just can't do that. And here's some ways that you can think about doing it differently. But no, I think that's true. But that's a messaging thing. I truly think it is. And Pam's right. We spend a lot of time educating Salt Lake County about what we do, which is why I think we've had some success at getting some funding over the course of time, because, you know, Joanna knows this as well as anybody going to the legislature. It's an educational process that we have to participate in, and we bring the message of what we do. And as a commission, I think we've been somewhat successful at really sort of changing the narrative. So, I mean, there's a lot to this.
Commissioner, sorry, I had a quick question. Just going back to Heather's point, I wanted to ask about that. We're talking about managing defenders, talking about bigger and smaller organizations and systems, obviously, but what about the point of how this works with cities and what priorities are there? What do you all think about how we address that as we move forward? It's sort of the opposite of Rich's point, I guess.
I mean, we had cities that filled out our system evaluation, right? And we talked to Ryan and Heather early on about how they wouldn't, and yet some did, and the others chose not to. And I think the point Ryan often makes is if they're not taking our funding, we have limited ability to tell them what to do, although I somewhat disagree because the Constitution is still the floor. But the funding of managing defenders that we do in Tooele, in Sevier, in Uinta, in roughly five places, those people would not be there but for our funding. And I think that changes the equation. And so if cities see the benefit, and I know Ryan did because he went to a different firm that has more organizational structure for his indigent defense in South Jordan, great. If they want our help in doing it, then Heather, I think this document becomes equally applicable to cities. And our whole goal, one of our founding principles is regionalization, right? Our goal is not to create 247 different managing defenders. It's to bring Plain City along with Roy, along with Ogden, right? Whatever the combinations may be, to create a more organized system. And then to Tom's point, to have it organized, have defenders organized to be a place at the table for the JRI discussions, right? The audit pointed out that local systems are not organized, and that includes defenders. So that was part of this goal too, was to have an organized voice who was accountable for the things that we're trying to argue for at the criminal justice table and to us, right? Locally, they face both directions. So not that I'm answering your question to Heather for you, But I will point out that several cities did respond to our systems evaluation and ask for our help.
And Ryan or Heather, do you have any other feedback from that question by Adam?
Well, okay, so I guess I'll jump in. And again, this gets back to, I think it's a fantastic aspirational document, and it's a wonderful document to have when a small system is trying to find a way to most appropriately and effectively bring a good and well-qualified public defender on board. It's interesting because on a local level, I mean, we're just so diverse. It's hard to speak, you guys. I'm sorry. Some systems have one public defender, some hire a firm that has five public defenders that do work on a contract. So it would be easier to have a managing defender in that instance. I guess I'm just thinking about the really small jurisdictions who have one public defender who covers the whole court calendar. And again, I think this is a great document for setting forth what we would like that individual attorney to do aspirationally. But I guess the difficulty for me trying to reconcile it is, what's that one attorney managing? What are they doing? Who part of the document's applicable, part of it's not.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else?
Hey, Joanna, do you know, so obviously from the conversations, it sounds like there could be some pushback from some agencies. Do we know if that's, do you think it's going to be fairly significant pushback, or do you think it's just more of once they understand better what we're trying to do, that will lessen? Do you have any sense of that?
Sure do. In the places where we fund people, they've been involved in the development of this document, and they have been supportive and involved and appreciative that we're finally actually giving them a job description for what we hired them to do. In the places where we are not yet, I would point to the southeastern corner of the state. We received a lot of pushback, right? Accusations that we're just creating a bureaucracy for no reason. We don't need anyone to tell us what to do, similar to what Mike Drexel was talking about, because they haven't, quite frankly, seen the benefits. And it wasn't universal. And some individuals were like, no, they were on our side, helping us push for it, right? And we saw this in Iron County, where we didn't have a managing defender before, and now we do. And he went in, and the defenders there were like, no, you will not tell us what to do. And he started helping them with getting more funding and helping them balance their caseloads and bringing other benefits. And I dare say it's a happy wonderland in Iron County, not entirely, but among the defenders, right? He's changed the conversation entirely. And it's really, I think, mostly a proof of concept, which Rich and Pam have known for decades, right? That we're trying to bring to smaller counties that haven't seen it and that see us as being from the government and here to help in the wrong ways and the wrong ideas, right? And I think that's what we've faced with the cities in large part all along, right? In our discussions with various cities. And I don't know about cities, but with counties, we have nearly all of them on board.
Yeah, and Joanna, I don't want to take a lot of time. I mean, I think the issue's been raised, and I appreciate everybody's input on it. So thank you.
Joanna, can I ask how many cities replied to our request?
You can, but I have to ask Leslie to unmute because she knows that answer.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to count.
And some of this will come up in the next presentation, but Leslie, do you have that at hand?
As how many cities responded? 4.
Which is more than we've had in the past, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good start. Just so the commission knows, the League of Cities and Towns has gotten into a habit of putting out requests for information from cities, and we all try to respond and be supportive. In the last couple sessions, that information's been used to beat cities up pretty good too. Because if you're not doing things as good as other people think you should, or if you do it a different way, providing your information just gives them a stick. That's why I said I like the idea of what we were doing, but I said I didn't think it'd be highly successful. I don't know exactly how many prosecutors offices there are, but there's roughly 240 some odd cities. So if we got 4, that's a fairly small percentage. I like the document. I like the concept. I like where we're going. I think I've been here since the beginning, and this is a great direction and something we've been trying to work on. I do think, and the more we do it, and I suggested this to one of the small groups, I do think we're going to have to just do something different with cities than what we've been doing with counties, because they're just different. I wish we could regionalize, but we can't even regionalize the cities in Salt Lake County. And I don't even know if Rich's group would want to take on all the cities in Salt Lake County. They'd be the most logical, but when we did an RFP, and I think when others have done, and I'm not even sure if you guys have bid on those, it's just, they're different and it'd be hard to cover. So I do like the document. I like where it's going. I don't think it's 100% applicable to cities, but I think it's the right direction.
Thank you. Here's my feedback. And it's my experience, of course, is the county. I think that someone made a comment, and it certainly reinforced to me that county commissioners need to grow in their understanding of the risk of not having the proper defense going on. That's a wow, right? It's shocking to hear that from Mary. And more, perhaps we get commissioners who are starting to realize how important this is. But then also just specific to the document, when I read it, what stood out to me was on the second page where it says IDC recognizes that systems around the state are in different stages of development. Managing defenders will not be able to execute all the activities on this list immediately. The model will inevitably evolve over time as more effective structures and procedures emerge. It's to guide the work. The list is neither comprehensive nor mandatory. And maybe that can be not only just in the text as it is, but you've done other documents where you pull it out, what you want people to have emphasized, you've pulled it out into a text box or whatever. And then just here's a practical example from Davis County. We have a wonderful managing director who wasn't interested in the IDC offerings from what he understood. And I don't think it was so much a concern about breathing down his neck or the county's neck as much as he just wasn't sure how long and how much the Davis County could rely on the funding into the future. And Davis County, and he tends to be super conservative with the budget, and felt like, if we're doing okay, then why would we put it out there and then we might not get it in a future year? But that's changed now. He actually is interested in some things because he's learned more, gotten used to it, whatever the reasons are. And so the funny thing is that when I got to be in our little group conversation for Davis County with IDC, we had our HR director, and he said, gosh, what is my job description? To the HR director, do I have a job description? Because it was long enough ago when he was asked to take on this role, and I don't think he knew if one had been provided to him, right? He was just doing the best thing he could to figure it out along the way, all these several years. And so HR found the job description, he sent it to all of us. And so I just see this as a help to someone like ours, that we're somewhere on this continuum, and this has been created by those who are expert, and so it helps us. So there's my 2 bits. You have any other specific questions for the group, Joanna, or anything to clarify?
I think it would be a good time to move to the last agenda item, and then we might even get out quite early.
That sounds great. Yeah, that was a great discussion. Thanks, everyone. So the last one is this grant tier discussion and voting. So go ahead and intro that too.
Yeah, so I think this discussion has set us up perfectly for this, if I dare say, and I really appreciate everyone's thoughts on it, because I think we, as a commission, are really understanding the issues better and better each year, even as we get new people. They just become clearer, and we get more perspective on a system that when we were created in 2016, right, or 2000, yeah, I had a statute to describe my job description, right? And we knew very little about what these next 5 years or 4 years would look like. So we've come a long way. So back to our funding process, the legislature gave us $2 million, which on top of our base budget. So we have almost 8 million total. Some of that is one time, 1 million of it is one time, the rest of it is ongoing. Some of it has to pay for me and my staff. Some of it has to pay for the appellate division, which the legislature funded. And then the rest of it is available for grants. So that is where we start. If you remember, we have had many different iterations of our grant process over the years. As we've grown, the requests have exceeded the funding. If you remember, I think it was FY20 requests were many tens of millions over what we had because systems were really asking for the moon, and we didn't give them guidance on what to ask for. And so we ended up having to cut and trim a lot of things. Last year, we had a ranking system that led to issues, and we dealt with those throughout the summer. So this year, my staff made a much more organized attempt to be collaborative with systems. And this is the process that we went through, and you all were there for many of them. I think I've calculated that we did about 24 to 26 hours of meetings across the state between all of us. And it was really helpful, right? The systems that did respond with evaluations, which was almost all of the counties, and caseload surveys, which was from defenders from almost all of the counties, in addition to those 4 cities. The discussions were really helpful. And Rich, you made the point earlier that we need a way to evaluate systems and evaluate the state. And that's what that system needs evaluation that Leslie developed, and the caseload survey that she developed are really targeted at. And I think, Leslie, if I'm not mistaken, that is intended to be a twice a year document, or maybe one of them is once a year, one is twice a year.
They're both twice a year, yes.
So needing that evaluation also reiterates the point as to why we need a managing defender. We need someone who can organize the local response to those. So the next step was that we asked them to file an intent to apply, which is this ITA. This intent to apply idea came from Greg and his experience with grant funding. And it was just a 4-question survey, basically, after these meetings, not a grant application, but listing their proposed grant idea items and their costs for each, as well as the tier designations for our grant funding tiers for each. And again, it's to put us on notice right now to know what's coming our way with grant applications, and to determine how we apply those to our tiers, or how the tier funding structure applies to the funding. So I put this a little bit in the email, but today we need to figure out a work group to delve into a lot of the issues that we just discussed, specifically applicable to this grant process. In hindsight, I would have done this before this meeting, but hindsight is 2020, and here we are. It will need to be a work group that works pretty quickly, and to make recommendations to the IDC. If it's fewer than 8 of you, they can't make a final decision. So there'll have to be an adoption by the IDC of the recommendations. Grantees know that they will be applying due by the 20th. Their applications are due by the 20th. The work group will then need to consider those applications, make sure we're all in line, and bring recommendations about them to the IDC meeting on June 3rd, which I hope is in all of your calendars. And then we will spend between June 3rd and July 1st getting them up and running and signed, and they will go into effect when the funding hits July 1st. I am talking very fast in an effort to let you all move on. Any questions about this so far? You know to interrupt me. Here's a reminder. These are the tiers that we've adopted, and these are the tiers that we conveyed to all the systems that for their applications, this is what they would be directed at. And this gets to the issues that we all talked about, right? The systems that can and did ask for a managing defender are not the smaller cities, right? They are not the individual smaller counties either. They are multi-county or large systems like Salt Lake County, Utah County, Davis County, Washington County. While the tier 2 requests are then the next level of priorities that still increase the capacity of managing defenders, but in those smaller systems. So that would be where, if cities were wanting to apply for this, they would apply. Tier 3 is all other requests. The way these tiers were designed, I think, is brilliant and gets to all of the points that we've talked about. It does, however, raise issues that have become clear in the grant requests. This is just a reminder that this is our first principle and why we started with these grant tiers. I know, I love PowerPoint animations. This is that organizational capacity, right? The baseline. If you have this, you can apply for grant funding and tell us how you're using it. In the past, we haven't had that. Our very first grant, Juab County, created that, right? Funneling it through Utah County. Utah County does the reporting, does the oversight, does the appointment, does the caseload management, something that Juab County couldn't do before, or wasn't doing before. So we'd had all these meetings, we told them all what to apply for. And in the past, there have been tens of millions of dollars of requests. And this year, for our 5.6 million in funding, there was only 7.3 million more. So not tens of millions, only 1.7 million more than we have, which is still to say it doesn't make it necessarily any easier than cutting $10 million in requests, right? Because these are much more finely honed and tailored to what the system really means, because as Commissioner Khumalo said yesterday when we were talking to her, we're really increasing that understanding of what we know about a system and what we know the global best practices and needs for indigent defense are. So in a sense, this smaller amount makes it just a little bit more heartbreaking. So this is again why we need the work group and why we need a really concerted effort to figure this out. So this is how the tier requests, so this is again in the intent to apply, it's not applications, but how they've identified their needs and how it broke down. As you'll see, tier 3 is one of the issues the work group needs to help work through, because that should say tier 1, not tier 3. Great typo there. So this is tier 1. This is the renewal requests in tier 1. Nice, I did a typo twice. Greg, I thought you caught all my typos. Just kidding. Sorry, this is tier 1.
This is tier 3.
It is tier 3. It is in the wrong place. There we go. Thank you, Leslie, for catching my typos. Now we're back. I think I had that there because I wanted to say tier 3. This is everything that's in it, but let's look at tier 1 too. So not only are these groups of funding requests, they're also broken down by renewal and new requests. So that's another issue the work group needs to determine. Are these renewal requests targeted at our priorities? And if they're not, what do we do with them? How do we rank them in the tiers and how do we fund them? And in tier 3, you see that there are significant amounts of renewal requests and a huge number of new requests. And these things are essential, right? These are what we've been funding all along and encouraging systems to apply for, defense resources. You have a duty to investigate a case as a defense attorney. You need an investigator to do that so that you don't get subpoenaed as a witness in your own case. We've been expanding the benefits of social workers across the state. We saw that article from the Utah County paper, whose name I'm forgetting, about the benefits. Utah County has finally been able to request and get from Utah County social workers, right? They couldn't do that before because their caseloads were so high. So our funding has helped them be able to manage social workers. If we have a system that doesn't have that organizational structure and we stick a social worker in there, how are we going to know what that social worker is doing and how their job description is meeting our standards? So again, the tier 1 requests that we have loosely we've designated as tier 1 and 2. I think we also need to have the work group review the designations, because there are things that we went through and we did it. There are things that differ from what counties designated them as. Again, we've talked about this. So this is the problem right now. If we fund 100% of each tier 1 request, that's that. If we then fund tier 2 at its full amount, that leaves only $251,000 for $2 million in tier 3 requests. So this is really all the discussion we had, all the issues I just raised come down to how we would allocate this funding. And we need this work group to really spend some time looking through the intents to apply the system evaluations to figure this out. This is a further breakdown of tier 3 requests. What we do with tier 3 might be different things. It may be that we prioritize certain items to fund. It may be that we prioritize percentages of items to fund. It may be that we say to counties, and Commissioner Kamalu and Milne, correct me if I'm wrong, counties have a significant amount of one-time funding coming in. And it may be that some of that one-time funding can go to mileage or the temporary pool for investigators. I see Sean
Yeah.
coming.
That's true. There is a lot of money coming, which we're still getting the guidance on. We haven't gotten all the guidance on. In fact, the only thing we know is that it can be used to replace impacted county revenues. That's one thing we know. Otherwise, we need the guidance. But I know that here, at least, we have had multiple meetings already, because we know that our system is going to be slammed with the start of jury trials and the backlog that exists. So we figure, I'll just say this because it might help others. We figure we may as well use some of this money to not only handle catching up over the next 2 or 3 years with this giant backlog and then the current crime, but do things that help us in the long term. So yes, it could be possible. We're sure going to have an eye on our system with the money that Davis County is getting.
So Lorraine's example sounds really responsible and mature. I'm not suggesting that all other counties are behaving opposite of that, but I do know that many from a conference held a week ago already have quite the Christmas list of, I wish, golly gee, I'd like to spend the money on XYZ items. And I don't know if any of them are, so in much the same way we might send out a save the date, I would strongly, decline. I would strongly suggest that we send out a placeholder of sorts to maybe put this on the radar. Because I have not heard, anecdotally or otherwise, any other county thinking, golly, let's save some money for public defense.
It is still the county's duty to provide defense resources, I will point out, and cities. It's in the statute. It's all in there.
I'm not disagreeing with the logic of any of that.
I know you're not.
Okay.
Yeah, and UAC, and even at the conference coming up, then we may have an opportunity to give examples or something.
Well, Lorraine, that agenda's already been set, but to that point, it might be incumbent upon us as a duty as IDC members, whether we kind of like it or not, to start disseminating the save some money aside message, or one way or another use that. Because while Lorraine mentioned that we're all kind of waiting on what Treasury tells us we can spend the money on, I'm a little worried that most of them are thinking of the golly gee, how can I look great to the public more outwardly with infrastructure? That is the number one thing most are speaking about, that they would use it on, like roads and bridge repairs. Anyway, not to get too off base here.
Yeah, no, I think it might be a good idea to do a heads up that thoughtfully crafted goes out.
Yeah, and I think that's why we need the working group to meet stat about decisions so that we can communicate that. And Sean, to Lorraine's point, she and I are on UAC's agenda for May 14th, 13th?
Yeah, something like that, 12th, something.
Yes. They were looking for another county commissioner who understood grants well, and that was the missing piece we were looking to provide. was someone who wanted to be in that role, but one of our managing defenders is on the panel.
Tom
Tom,
Ross is on the panel, yeah.
you're on there also.
Mhm.
So I'll just get through our very last slide. This is the job you're signing up for. Review those intent to applies. They're all in your materials along with the system evaluations. Look at that managing defender job list again, make any comments you have about it and think more about its purpose. And then go through and recommend how we tier designate each of the items so that we can tell counties when you're applying for this, this is what it's been designated as. If it's tier 3, it may not get funded. We have told them that all along, but to reiterate that based on what we know now. And then to make sure we have everything on the application form that you want to see. And then again, later in May, review applications or make a recommendation on applications to the IDC.
Great.
So I think it would be really important to have defenders and county commissioners on this working group.
Yeah. This was the part where we were going to ask for volunteers. And what I said is that pretty much I think we should choose our volunteers. So, and I kind of said, I'm not sure how good I would be, but then they said, no, you probably would have a perspective. So if you would be willing to do that, go ahead and let's go ahead and identify yourself for Joanna.
This is Wally. I'm willing, happy to.
Thank you.
What, do we have a date, which day we're going to meet?
I think we need to choose that date, right, Joanna?
Yeah, ideally, we'd meet next week for the initial meeting to just so that we can get advice out to the counties before that May 20th application deadline. That would give them then really 2.5 full weeks to apply. So between next week and early the week after, we need to meet. And then we do need to figure out if there aren't 8 people volunteering, how a recommendation gets approved by the IDC. So if we need to set a 10-minute IDC meeting after that for approval of those recommendations, because a group smaller than a quorum can't make a binding decision for the IDC. So I would say next week, we can be flexible, maybe the 29th, a week from today.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so I see.
I got Wally.
Yeah, no, there's several hands. You've got Wally and then Pam Vickery. And I see Margaret Lindsay's got a hand up.
I heard Sean Milne.
Sean Mill for sure will have a hand up just because he has to.
I'm not a county commissioner anymore, but okay.
You're being voluntold. Let's see, who else? Michael Zimmerman's got a hand.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Mary Corporon, thank you. Might be missing, but I'm trying to scroll through. Michael Drexel, got you, thank you. How many is that, Joanna?
Wally, Pam, Margaret Lindsay, Sean, Michael Zimmerman, Mary, and Michael Drexel is 7.
Richard Morrow.
And Richard.
Ryan Luce, are you interested?
I'm happy to. If you need and you want the city's perspective, I'd be more than happy to.
So if we want all of you involved, then that's a quorum, which we'd have to notice up and have an official meeting, which is fine. We'd also need a designated chair. We can do
I can share it. I can share it. That's fine.
Then it's basically a full IDC meeting, but it's going to be an involved read through things, discuss it. So anyone want to rescind their volunteer? We have enough time to notice it. We can do it.
Yeah. Whatever, if we have enough, I mean, this group really stepped up. So
yeah.
If you are.
And you're thinking the same time of day, Joanna, correct?
Does the 29th at 2 work for everyone?
You know, it does work for me.
Yeah, it works.
I have another obligation starting at 3 that day, so I'd have to be done in the first hour.
Okay.
1 o'clock is also good. Oh, sorry, someone.
This is Mary. I was going to say that time is fine with me, and maybe we should just leave it the way it is because we have some lawyers in this group and hearings tend to run long and crop up. So maybe we should keep a larger group if this is time sensitive and needs a quorum. Maybe we shouldn't have anyone drop off right now.
So should we make it 1 p.m. so that we bind Michael Drexel to attend?
I can do one.
I can do one.
Sorry,
So
Michael.
anyone who cannot do one? Oh, amazing.
That is amazing. Okay. We will notice that up and you will chair it.
And do we have all the materials we need for that with those other docs that came in this time?
I believe you do. I will think about that and make sure. I'll create a new folder with those. But for now, the documents that are under tab or labeled number 5 are the documents that we would need for this.
Yeah, so we could start reading those now. Good. Fantastic. Any other question that you have, Joanna or staff? Or anybody? Any other question? All right.
No, I really appreciate it.
It's only 3:13. So bonus.
Look how many volunteers we get when we keep it to an hour and 15-minute meeting.
And you'll send out that invite right away because there could be something pop up on the calendar later today. So yeah, we'll save that. That sounds really, really good. And then there's the other dates still at the bottom of the agenda. The June 3rd is the important funding meeting. That'll be the next one following, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Great meeting. Thanks, everyone. That was a lot of staff put a lot of thought into this meeting today too, to figure out how to empower us for the next step. So thanks to all of you and the staff. All right. Well, everyone have a great day and a beautiful weekend. And I guess if you have any question that comes up, send it to Joanna.
Happy to.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank
Do you
you.
want to make a motion,
Oh
Lorraine?
yeah, move, who, motion to adjourn it from anybody?
I made the motion to adjourn.
And that was
That was Wally.
Wally. Wally's got it. And
And
a
I'll
second
second.
from Ryan, was that you? All right. I think we're good. Have a good conference down there, Ryan, and thanks everyone. See ya.